I'm going to tell you a little bit more about our journey in reducing supply chain emission or scope 3 today. So I do like the sound of my own voice quite a bit, so I may use all the 15 minutes that we've got together, but if that's the case, then happy to have a chat at the end of it. And if you do have time for questions now during the session, that would be great. Okay. So before I start telling you about our own journey, I would like to start with a very non-artificial intelligence test, which is, could you please raise your hand if you work for an organization that currently calculate and disclose scope 3 supply chain emission? Right, and can you keep your can you still have your hand up if you've got a net zero target that covers your scope 3 supply chain emission? All right, so what's that, less than 10%? So I guess that gives you a bit of a sense on where we are really on supply chain emission. It is hard. I mean, scope 3 supply chain emission are hard to understand, they're hard to report, they're hard to reduce. So I think that's a good starting point for the conversation, because I'm going to show you where we are, and we've been on this journey for 2 years, but also I don't want you to leave this presentation thinking, oh, we are absolutely smashing it. We know everything we're doing, and you're lagging behind because you're not doing certain things. The reality is that everyone is starting, everyone is trying to do their best, and that's really where we are. So where we are here is the journey after 2 years. So the first thing is that, so I work for Lloyd's banking group. It's a financial institution, and carbon emission in a financial institution are probably a little bit different than other organizations. So you've got your own operations, you've got the supply chain, and then you've got the financed emission, which is like a big part of it. But to give you a sense, we are around 60,000 colleagues, 2,000 buildings, all around the country. And this is the carbon emission that we produce from our own operations. So that's all people flying around, the home working emission, commuting, all the electricity, the gas that we use, etc., etc. And this is our supply chain. So even with such a large operations, our supply chain emission are still 6 or 7 times bigger. In reality, they're probably bigger than that, because we know that there is more money that we spend, that we're still trying to understand what carbon emission is driving. But also, it goes beyond the sites. And what I say really is that when we talk to supply chain and the impact that you can have on your supply chain, then the shadow of your impact is really bigger than your own impact, because the suppliers that we work with are also the suppliers of other organizations. They're your suppliers. They're suppliers of our customers. They are our customers sometimes. So really the impact that we can have on supply chain emission is really, really big. And that's why we cannot really just pass by and do nothing, really. So what are we doing about? Well, the first thing is that we set a public ambition 2 years ago to reduce the supply chain emission that we drive by 50% by 2030, and on a path to net zero by 2050 or sooner. And I did say ambition, I didn't say target, because the reality is that lots of these things are outside of your scope. So you also need to be realistic, or the things that you can or you cannot do. But having this ambition in place is absolutely essential, because then sort of drives the focus in the organization, it drives the leadership buying, and it really drives the strategy. So setting a target is certainly, or setting an ambition is certainly the first part of the journey, and it has been for us. So we know it's big, we know we've got an ambition, then what are we going to do about? Well, the first thing that we do is trying to understand where do these emissions come from. We've got 2,000-3,000 suppliers. We spend around £5 billion with them. Not all these suppliers are driving emission at the same way. And after we looked at the data, which at the beginning are very inaccurate, what we find is that around 80% of our emission comes from a group of around 150 suppliers, which are also the suppliers where we spend 80% of our money. And that is not really uncommon. In fact, it's probably the same for most of you. This rule of 80-20 or 90-10, most organizations will find that the vast majority of their emission come from a very small group of suppliers. And I believe there is a sequence of things then when it comes to approaching these suppliers. And the first part of it is definitely the engagement. So engaging with the suppliers to understand where they are on the journey. And the way that we've engaged with them is using something called the Emerald Standard, which is a clear set of 13 requirements that we ask this group of key suppliers to work towards. I won't walk into the details of all of these one just for time, but to give you a sense, starting from the orange one and clockwise, we ask a supplier to disclose their scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emission, because we do take scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 of our suppliers into our calculation. We ask them to disclose it through CDP and to achieve at least a B score. We ask CDP because it's a standardized way to get this data, and we ask a B score because we don't really validate transition plans. So the CDP score gives us a sense that the organization has got the right tools in place to achieve what they say that we're going to achieve. And then we ask to have a net zero target by 2050, covering all the scopes, and an interim target by 2030, or just a target by 2030. We ask for the target to be aligned with science, with a 1.5-degree pathways, not necessarily science-based target, but aligned with science. And then goes above and beyond the environmental side. We also ask them to have an EcoVadis scorecard of 59 or above. Now, two fundamentals of all this is that we're not asking our suppliers to do anything that we're not doing ourselves. And really, we're not asking our suppliers to do anything above and beyond what they may be doing already. So if as a supplier, you got a net zero, you've got your CDP, your EcoVadis, you don't need to tell us anything. We just get the data, we know where you are, and that's it. Like from a supplier, it's very lightweight. On the other side, if you're not, then we need to talk to you quite a bit to help you on that journey. So how is it going? Well, this is our carbon footprint, 785,000 tons of CO2. I've been told is enough to fill Wembley Stadium 100 times. And last year we had 152 suppliers in scope of the Emerald Standard, and 36 of them have actually met all the requirements that were set. But also all of them are moving towards the right direction. This looks great. Our emission is still gone up year on year. So our suppliers are doing great, they're moving towards the right direction, emissions are still going up. And that's something that you will find in many organizations, because one of the biggest challenges is for us, and probably for all of you that are approaching this, getting some sort of accurate data. As you move towards very generic data industry level into actually a portion or allocated emission, you will find that the numbers tend to go down. But that is probably our biggest challenge to date. It's like we're talking to the supplier, they're well engaged, they're working towards it, but we start from an initial position where the data are not really reliable. I mean, if you're approaching supply chain emission program today, what you will find is that it is a completely estimation based on industry average emission. And the challenge is moving from that starting point into a position where your suppliers are able to give you product and service level emission. And that is it's challenging and it takes time. But we're certainly on that journey, and we see more and more suppliers moving towards that piece. So that is really our approach to engage suppliers. What is next for us? As I said, this is a journey. Every organization goes in their own journey. This is what is working for us, but we recognize there's a lot more to do. So some of the stuff we're looking at is we're building like an Emerald Standard guidance document that we would like to put in the public domain, because we know that what we're doing may help others doing something similar. We're really starting to work towards a system that will reward the participation and the collaboration on the Emerald Standard and progress above and beyond sort of the recognition that they get from us. We're looking at automating some of this stuff. Again, there is lots of data, and we rely a lot still on spreadsheet, Power BI, and so on. So we're really trying to understand how we can automate some of this process better. We keep engaging with the suppliers. This year, we're hosting the first face-to-face supplier sustainability summit, which is like 300 people coming to talk to us and sharing a day where we really make a clear statement of what we're looking for from them, what are they on the journey, and we help them on their journey. Up to really making some of this stuff more visible, because sometimes you will find that within the organization, the supply chain emission target seems to be almost like a procurement target. In reality, it's not. It's a business. Target. It's something that each business unit needs to get on. So there is still lots of work to do. But as I said earlier, there is a sequence of things that needs to happen when you approach your supplier, and we are certainly at the beginning of the stage, at the beginning of the process, where we need to speak to our suppliers, understanding where they are, where they're going, and how we can help them. And the last thing that I would like to say, which is probably the message that I keep saying and I keep hearing when I go to events that talk specific about supply chain, is that this is a relatively new thing. There are organizations that have been doing this for years, but in reality, it's not a perfect journey. Scope 1 and Scope 2, we know what we're doing. There's a gazillion thing that you can do, instruments and so on. When it comes to supply chain, you need to start, and you need to start from a position where the data are not great, but you need to keep moving, so sort of to make your own path into net zero or whatever your target is.